Our keynote speakers today are Bonnie Lewkowicz and Lori Gray. Bonnie and Lori each have over 40 years of experience working in advancing disability rights and access to outdoor recreation. Bonnie currently serves as the program manager for the Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program, and Lori is the Outings and Adventure manager there. Each of these women have a wealth of experience advocating, educating, and increasing access to parks and the outdoors for people with disabilities. Welcome, Bonnie and Lori.
Well, thank you, and good day to everyone. My name is Bonnie Lewkowicz, and I am a white woman of retirement age with salt and pepper hair, and I'm wearing glasses, a teal shirt, and my background looks like I'm in the forest, and I also use a motorized wheelchair. Lori, you want to describe yourself?
Yes, my name is Lori Gray. I am a Chicano, also of retirement age. I am speaking to you from Berkeley, and I am wearing a t-shirt and jeans, sitting in my manual wheelchair, and I am also blind and have other disabilities.
Thanks, Lori. So as Lori mentioned, we're coming to you today from Berkeley, California, where it's still morning, and it's the unceded Huichin territory of the Lijan Ohlone people. So our presentation today is about barriers, but in addition to highlighting some of the biggest barriers as we see them, we also want to offer some examples of how collaborating and advocacy can be a healthy way to alleviate some of these barriers. And part of the reason that the list of barriers is so extensive is that disability is on a spectrum. There's no two people experiencing disability the same, and accessibility needs vary greatly. However, if you take an inclusive design approach, both for the built environment and programs, there's a better chance that you're going to serve a wider audience. I also think it's important to point out that when there are barriers to parks, well, everything for that matter, whether physical or programmatic, that these barriers not only impact the person with a disability, but everyone else that might be going with them and now can't. So we need to think more broadly about who is impacted by these barriers. No doubt we have a diverse audience out there of park users and park personnel attending. So if you feel that this discussion is not addressing your concerns, I invite you to be open-minded, because creating accessibility to parks really involves a dialogue and collaboration between park users and park staff in order to get it right. So the more we know about each other's barriers, the better off we'll all be. While I'm not versed in Canadian access laws, the barriers we face here in the States, I'm sure, are pretty similar and universal. But I'm also not going to focus on accessibility laws other than to say that when these laws and guidelines exist, they really represent minimums. And I want you to start thinking about the ceiling and not the floor. And I also like to see the discussion about accessibility broaden to include equity, because accessibility is just one aspect to serving visitors with disabilities. It's also important to be aware that sometimes when creating access for some individuals, you inadvertently create barriers for others. One example of this is that while having programs go virtual over these last few years, it's been a tremendous advantage for many people with physical disabilities. However, it's created some barriers, especially in the beginning, for people who are deaf, blind, and neurodiverse. And in this first slide, there's a picture of a paved trail with some trees arching over the trail. So can we go to the next slide, please? So I've broken down the barriers into two categories: organizational and park visitor barriers. However, there is crossover. In fact, there's one overarching barrier, which I consider the single greatest barrier to accessibility, and it's what I call the information barrier, and for which I spent a good part of my career working to eliminate. I was happy to hear Marie-Helene talk about some of their guiding principles and mention trip planning as one of the issues they were going to be addressing. So I even suggest that the information barrier is the easiest and least expensive barrier to remove, and can also have the biggest bang for your buck. I know others are going to be speaking on this topic, so I'm not really going to delve into it too much, other than to say that there's a tremendous need for more comprehensive access information anywhere that people go to get their information. Because this lack of information currently means that people with disabilities must become online sleuths. We have to check out blogs, social media posts, talk to friends, websites, and even make phone calls, if we can even find a phone number to call, to find out what we might encounter even on so-called accessible trails, since that term typically means wheelchair accessible and discounts other access needs. When this information is readily available to park staff, they can easily respond to any inquiry, which in turn sends a message to the person inquiring that their needs have been thought about, and will also make that individual feel welcome at that park. And it also prevents staff from giving erroneous information that could negatively impact the visitor's experience, such as one that I had a few years ago when I was visiting Zion National Park. And a ranger told me about a trail that left from behind the visitor center, which was great because I was short on time. I got out, and about a quarter mile before I encountered a step that I couldn't navigate in my motorized wheelchair. So I had to turn back, and needless to say, I wasn't very happy. So in this slide, we have a picture of a trail signage, and it lists the trail name, gives the length, and then talks about the accessible features of cross slope, running slope, trail width, and surface type. Next slide, please. So we have very limited time, so I'm just going to quickly mention some of the biggest barriers as we see them. And they also aren't listed in any specific order. So we've already talked about the need for access information, or the barrier. And the next one, organizational-wide buy-in. So in order for accessibility and inclusion to take on meaning, it really requires a cultural shift and buy-in at the top levels. If it doesn't start there, it won't happen or be sustainable. Limited knowledge about disability. I suggest that park personnel suspend judgments about what they think they know about disability. Other people's preconceived ideas about our capabilities and interests often become our barrier. A quick example. Many years ago, National Parks here in the States was putting in a new mountaintop hiking only camp, and decided that since no one in a wheelchair could make that difficult hike, they didn't need to make the restroom accessible. Well, guess what? They were wrong. Someone did make it up there, and when they got there, there was no accessible bathroom. So technology for mobility devices is changing rapidly, and with it, the kinds of trails that individuals are now able to hike. So thinking beyond physical access, as we've heard many times before, that it really goes way beyond ramps and wide doorways. There's so many other types of disabilities that often get overlooked, as does programmatic access, which isn't really quite fully understood. It's really about creating equal opportunity. Funding is kind of a no-brainer. We know that it's not endless, but thinking about accessibility has to be included in everything that Parks does, especially ongoing maintenance. Nothing more frustrating than coming across a situation that used to be accessible and no longer is. Next slide, please. Moving on to park visitor barriers. Again, here we see the lack of information. Physical access, well, we know that nature is not inherently accessible. Transportation is really a big barrier for where Lori and I live, I imagine elsewhere. And we're in a really large metropolitan area. Often public transit doesn't go to parks, and often there is no physical address for a trailhead or visitor center, which means that paratransit won't drop you off without an address. We're working with our local parks on this, and it's an example of where a little advocacy can lead to an inexpensive barrier removal. Communication, it's important to think about programs in their entirety, from how people hear, learn about the program, utilize the facilities, and interact with staff and other participants in the program. This can include signage for trails and on maps, materials in alternative formats, having an accessible website, providing a sign language interpreter. And Lori has taught me that not listing a phone number to sign up for programs is a big barrier for some blind individuals, because some of the event registration software like Eventbrite, Sign Up Genius don't work with screen readers. Also, we have to recognize not everyone has computer access or internet access. Then there's historical exclusion. You know, the adage, build it and they will come, doesn't necessarily apply to groups of people that have traditionally been excluded. And we know from other marginalized groups that if they don't see that staff, if they don't see staff that represents their identity, they're likely to feel less welcome. So next slide, please. In the beginning, I mentioned that to get access right requires dialogue and collaboration. I now want to turn it over to Lori to talk about the advocacy work that she's done with our regional park district, which happens to be the largest in the country, spanning with 73 parks spanning across 125,000 acres. So Lori, we are at 9:18.
Forming partnerships with community groups and parks has been a very effective advocacy tool. We have a long-standing partnership with East Bay Regional Parks District. This started when I had to contact parks individually to get information because their website was not accessible for a screen reader. And even if I'd been able to read the website, it's pretty clear that there wasn't going to be any access information there at the time I was looking. So I was contacting rangers individually, parks personnel, and docents to set up outings to some of the parks. It became clear that none of us had much information about what the accessibility features were. Working with the staff was the beginning of our partnership. This partnership has enabled us to go camping with East Bay Park staff. Over the last 14 years, over 100 individuals with disabilities, their families, friends, and caregivers have been able to participate in a weekend camping trip where folks learned what it takes to do a tent camping outing. One issue we had to figure out was how to recharge a power chair on a 3-day camping trip. Initially, we used a generator. However, due to the noise, after a couple years, we couldn't do that anymore. Now we run a power cord from the power closet next to the bathroom to our campsite. This enables us to power wheelchairs, CPAP machines, and inflate aerobeds. We can only do this, however, on a camping trip staffed by East Bay Parks, which means we cannot do this independently yet. However, due to the raised awareness on this issue, the parks are now planning to install a power outlet at the large group campsite we use at Lake Del Val. They are also going to be providing power for their new group campsite at the Quarry Lakes Dumbarton Campground. This partnership has also resulted in opportunities for training parks personnel regarding disability awareness, equity, and inclusion. We work with our partners to create visitor center exhibits with braille, large print, and audio features. We collaborated on a series of virtual and in-person outings, including a Black Diamond Mine outing. During the pandemic, participants signed up for a virtual tour of the mine. They were provided with a kit containing plants, rocks, and items to touch, smell, and taste. These items were marked with large print and puff paint representing Braille. The naturalist referred to them during the Zoom, and this added a hands-on component. This enhanced the overall experience for everyone. Last December, we went to Black Diamond Mine for an in-person tour of the mine and picnic. We also got to check out skulls, plants, and other pelts, and a sound station. We also work with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, otherwise known as GGNRA. We had to take a different approach here. The approach that myself and other advocates took, and is sometimes necessary, was to file an official complaint because GGNRA was not in compliance and needed motivation to create access. They continue to be our partners. We have provided space for community workshops and open houses for GGNRA to get the word out about planned access improvements. And this has given the community an opportunity for input during the design process. These partnerships have created an opportunity for an ongoing dialogue and continued community engagement. Nothing about us without us. And this has resulted in greater access. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. And the slide that we have up is the Black Diamond Mines, and it shows a ranger with a welcome BORP sign and then a group of participants wandering around a very green lawn, which is not green right now. Next slide, please. So I have always ascribed to the practice of to be the change that you want to see in the world. So I've spent most of my life advocating for greater access. And yes, it shouldn't fall on disabled people to shoulder the burden of enforcing our rights. But I have found that when trying to gain better access, educating people is often much more effective and appreciated than confrontation. And it can lead to rewarding relationships. Most recently, I have taken to filing access complaints with our Parks District, and they've been super responsive to fixing the problems. The complaints have been easy fixes that maintenance staff could do in a few hours. And I'm always told, well, we don't know what we don't know, so we need people to tell us. So this is an example of a place called Coyote Hills. And when the park put in overflow parking due to high usage during the pandemic, they didn't put in access aisles at the accessible parking space. So after I notified them about it, they installed an access aisle within a few days. And this slide shows the first, photo on the left without an access aisle and the photo on the right with an access aisle. Next slide. At the same park, they installed an inaccessible pay machine at the entrance. We discussed solutions and they came up with a temporary one. My personal solution was to buy a park membership, which entitled me to free entrance, so I didn't have to pay. So what resulted from my interactions with the park district is that now they see me as a community partner instead of a thorn in their side. I've been asked to help staff publish an article in Parks Journal, participate on a trail users advisory group, and this Friday I'll be on a hiring panel for a new recreation program manager. It's been a win-win. And I forgot to point out that the solution to this pay station that's on the screen is a sign that says for ADA assistance with the self-pay machine, call this number, and it's to the ranger. And there's good cell reception out there. Excuse me. So in closing, providing accessibility and barrier removal will be an ongoing process, especially since nature, as we know, can wreak havoc on the environment. Over time, these barriers will become less significant, enabling more people with disabilities to get out in nature. And hopefully, in turn, more people with disabilities will have a greater interest in land stewardship. I want to thank you. And we have posted our email addresses on the screen. And I guess they'll also be available on the website for the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie and Lori. I really enjoyed that presentation. And I was smiling to myself because a lot of the barriers that you brought up, informational, non-physical barriers, transportation, these are all things that are going to be coming up in our panel discussion later this afternoon. So hopefully you guys are able to dial into the webinar for that. I think we have time for one quick question. You talked about getting like a really good response from your local parks about when you brought forward accessibility issues. Do you know if they have like a dedicated person, like a customer service rep who's highly focused on that? I know sometimes these complaints and these emails can kind of get lost in just void of, feedback and stuff. So
Yes, I can answer that. They do have a dedicated person. It's kind of hard to find that person, although I think it's gotten a little easier. And unfortunately, this person is in the risk management department, which means that they have a legal background and they're not, there's no, well, overriding, they look at the ADA, because here we do have laws that they have to enforce, ABA and ADA. And so I don't know that individual departments have someone that are constantly making sure that before something gets built, that it is accessible. So to answer your question, yes and no. I think they're in the wrong department, but there is a way, and they want you to make it a formal complaint instead of just talking to, a park ranger, which a lot of people don't want to take the time to do, understandably. But I really think we have to if we want to see the changes.
absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank you both so much for your time today. We're so grateful to have you guys, both of you, speak at our conference.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.